Greetings, class. This is the lecture for January 30th, 2018 for Africana Studies 161, American Political Institutions, A Black Perspective. We will be going over the PowerPoint for Chapter 1. We'll be talking about the what's in the news as a preview of what the kind of news you should be searching for, and some other things. So I wanted to do a Zoom class, but because I'm in trial, the court said, well, you're going to have to figure that out. And she wouldn't let me cut out time so that either I can start a class, end a class, have a class. But it is a very important trial. The young man is facing a life sentence, and it is very, very important. So hopefully you can get something out of this video. It will run probably the better part of an hour, but you can watch it during the class time. I encourage you to watch it during the class time so you won't procrastinate and not watch it at all, but you can also refer back to it. This will be posted on YouTube, and I will post the link for you to watch it by the morning of class, Tuesday, January 30th, 2018. So first thing we want to do is we're going to share the screen so we can see the PowerPoint. Normally during a Zoom class, even though I'm using Zoom, it's not live. But what I would prefer, what I would like to do is that you mark your attendance by entering chat at the bottom and putting your name. That's not possible this time, but next time. Become familiar with Zoom. Download it. I think it's on your CSUN, on the CSUN website, and you should be able to download it and get used to its operation. So now we're going to go to share screen and go to the PowerPoint. Oh, that's not it. Here it is. So the news for January 29th, this Monday evening, first story, and the stories will usually last about 5 minutes, as some of you experienced, or most of you experienced. But I just wanted to make sure these stories are covered for the 29th. On Fox News, the assistant director of the FBI has stepped down from the FBI after being severely criticized by President Trump and his allies for what they consider misconduct and apparently disloyalty. Let's listen.
It was just confirmed by Fox News while the president was speaking that the FBI Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe, is out at the Bureau. And this just coming in with the confirmation from Fox News saying the sources familiar say that in advance of the IG report, McCabe was told to begin what is referred to as terminal leave, is the language being used. In other words, taking all his vacation time until that's done, but he is now officially out, will not be going to work anymore at the FBI. Could you provide some context for us on this breaking news, Guy?
Well, it's speculatory or speculative at this point, but you look at this timing. Yesterday, Catherine Herridge reporting the FBI director went up to Capitol Hill and read this Republican memo that they want to release, a vote today at 5 p.m. on whether to do that, by the way. And then the next day, Wray's deputy announces that he's done. Is something in that memo that reflects poorly on Mr. McCabe? Is he resigning effectively in protest over the imminent release of the memo? We don't know yet, but the fact that Wray read the memos yesterday and McCabe is out today, weeks before he was supposed to go.
So you're connecting the dots.
I think that's interesting.
Well,
so this is an important story and relevant to the class because once again, we are faced with the government, the structures of the government. And we're going to get that a little later in the semester. The House, which is part of the legislative branch, is issuing a report on the FBI, which is part of the executive branch, and in the midst of this investigation on whether President Trump's campaign collaborated with the Russians and the Russian government in the 2016 election, which saw him elected. Here's the second story. Which from CNN, the House Intel Committee votes to release Nunes memo on FBI. This is an interesting story. It's interesting because there has been this, at this point, a vote on release. Well, let's listen.
Crossed a deeply regrettable line in this committee where, for the first time in the 10 years or so that I've been on the committee, there was a vote to politicize the declassification process of intelligence and potentially compromise sources and methods. This is where we are. We had votes today to politicize the intelligence process, to prohibit the FBI and the Department of Justice from expressing their concerns to our committee and to the House, and to selectively release to the public only the majority's distorted memo without the full facts. A very sad day, I think, in the history of this committee. As I said to my committee colleagues during this hearing, sadly, we can fully expect that the President of the United States will not put the national interest over his own personal interest. But it is a sad day indeed when that is also true of our own committee, because today this committee voted to put the President's personal interest, perhaps their own political interest, above the national interest, in denying themselves even the ability to hear from the department and the FBI. And that is, I think, a deeply regrettable state of affairs. But it does show how, in my view, when you have a deeply flawed person in the Oval Office, that flaw can infect the whole of government. And today, tragically, it infected our committee.
So what what was released is somewhat unprecedented. A memo that was declassified, and but they released it without the FBI having an opportunity to look at it. And it has usually been what they call the left, those people who were considered progressive and who are critical of the FBI and law enforcement for violating people's rights. And you have the right, which in this case would be the conservatives and the Republicans, who are denouncing the FBI and law enforcement because they appear to be going after President Trump. It's another story. That was CNN. This is another story from Fox News. It's a short story, but a Vermont high school has plans to fly the Black Lives Matter flag at their school. Now, Vermont is a majority. It's a white state, vastly, very few Black people in Vermont. But they said, in solidarity, they're going to fly the Black Lives Matter flag. A state senator, a legislator, criticized it, saying that he didn't believe that Black Lives Matter was an organization that was apparently worthy of being honored in such a fashion. But it's important to note that there is Black Lives Matter is both a network or organization. It's a hashtag, and it's a political slogan and a movement. So not everyone who is part of Black Lives Matter is part of the organization, because the slogan has far outstripped its use solely by the organization or the network that is Black Lives Matter. But it was important for him to say he was not bigoted or prejudiced, but the Racial Justice Alliance requested that the flag be flown, and believed that it was important to show that they also agreed that Black Lives Matter. Now, this is from CNN. Firing Mueller would end Trump presidency, because it was discovered that President Trump actually did attempt to fire the special or the special counsel, Robert Mueller.
I've got legislation protecting Mr. Mueller, and I'll be glad to pass it tomorrow. I see no evidence that President Trump wants to fire Mr. Mueller now. I don't know what happened back last year, but it's pretty clear to me that everybody in the White House knows it'd be the end of the President Trump's presidency if he fired Mr. Mueller. So I think we're in a good spot with Mr. Mueller.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, of course, warning of the stark consequence for President Trump to fire special counsel Robert Mueller. This comes after reports revealing President Trump did want to fire Mueller last summer. Obviously, he didn't act on that. Now, some bipartisan lawmakers do want to pass this bill to protect Mueller from being terminated. Will that happen? Should it? Joining us now, Republican Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas. First of all, I know you were working very late and you were traveling. Thank you for doing this. I really want to talk to you about immigration, but I need you on the record about this. Congressman, do you think that this is a law you would back because it is necessary?
What I would say to you, Chris, is the entire process is still unfolding, unfortunately, in front of us, rather than where it needs to take place as a full investigation What happened originally was the president saw the team that Mr. Mueller assembled, and that team did not appear to be completely fair. There appeared to be some bias with them. Now, what should we do with the bill? I have no reason to believe that we need to pass any bill that tells the president how he should or should not conduct himself as it relates to Mr. Mueller. I think that you have already heard that the president has appropriately listened to counsel, appropriately allowing this to take place and move forward. And I believe that is the right thing. And it's in the best interest of Americans if we do allow former Director Mueller, who is an honorable and good man, to not only complete his investigation, but to report to the nation all the findings and facts that he's got.
And last, the Cleveland Indians are dropping this logo from uniforms in 2019. And this is the logo. Considered racist. There had been demonstrations by Native Americans.
He survived record rain and a supplier.
There had been boycotts and demonstrations by Native Americans for many of the symbols in sports. The Washington Redskins, the Kansas City Chiefs, Cleveland Indians, because of the exploitation of the image. So beginning in 2019, they will no longer feature this character, which is Chief Wahoo or Woohoo in its logo. When I post this, I hope people can comment on both the news stories and the lessons that we'll be going through the rest of the PowerPoint. Also, coming up February 8th through 18th at the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza is the Pan-African Film Festival. This is the 26th annual Pan-African Film Festival, and it's not just films by and about Black people, African people in the diaspora. There are also films that are very relevant to this class. So I hope folks take advantage. You can earn extra credit by going to a film and writing a critique of the film. But those films that relate to the class, of course, because they have a wide variety of films. They have comedies and historical films, films on politics, films on culture. They also have different events. So if you would like to, I will have an extra credit section up. So you can take advantage of going to the Pan-African Film Festival. So chapter 1, American Government and Politics in a Racially Divided World. This is a photograph, as the caption says, of the Great Ohio River Flood of 1937. You see a lot of African-American adults waiting in line for food and clothing due to the losing their property during the flood. And what you also see is the billboard in back of them saying, "World's highest standard of living, there's no way like the American way." Well, this has always been kind of the contradiction of America. Freedom, justice, equality, wealth, power, these are all things, but for the greater part of its existence, all those things lie solely in the hands of ancestors of European descent, or those of European descent, while those of African descent have been systematically excluded from those things. It's stark where you have a line, you see these black folks lined up waiting to get some relief, and not as compelling, but reminiscent of the flood in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina hit, and the vast majority of people who were left behind and who died were African American. Not only African Americans, but a good portion. And people looked upon them, including apparently the President of the United States, as if they were not fully American citizens, like the recent floods in Puerto Rico. They are American citizens, even though they can't vote, even though they have no representation in Congress. They are American citizens, citizens of the United States. So you have this this picture, which has the smiling people in the car versus the pretty grim faces of those waiting in line, trying to alleviate their suffering. So, race in the United States. Race is not a matter of skin color. The color of skin is something that people usually cannot help. You know, unless you get a tan or unless you bleach your skin. Skin is skin. It doesn't measure intelligence. It doesn't measure culture. It doesn't measure earning capabilities. And it doesn't measure genetics other than color of skin. There are racially, in the United States, black people are, there was what was called and is called the one drop rule. So if you have one drop of, you have any discernible trait of African ancestry, you are considered black. This is why I asked the question at the beginning of class. As light as I am, and there are people a lot lighter whose skin is milky white, and a person with milky white skin went in front of the United States Supreme Court and said, why are you making me ride in, why are you discriminating against black people and making us ride in separate cars? He wasn't trying to divide himself from black people, but they said, you know what, let's get the lightest, most white looking guy to bring this case to the Supreme Court. And that was a case of Plessy versus Ferguson. And we're going to go through pretty much in detail a lot of the stuff we're talking about right now. But Plessy, Homer Plessy, looked like a white man. But he was not white because he had that one drop. He had discernible African ancestry. And that made him black. It was not the color of his skin. And when that is said, people automatically default to, well, it's, you know, it's the dark people. And while at one time that might have been true, most Africans brought from the continent of Africa had extremely dark skin. There has been miscegenation here in the United States, but the resulting children in a process or what we call hypodescent, when you have a dominant and a subordinate race or peoples, the child takes on the character of the subordinate. So when Thomas Jefferson had children by Sally Hemings, the white Thomas Jefferson had children by Sally Hemings, her children, even if they were lighter than her, were still considered black and were still enslaved by their father, Thomas Jefferson. To say that it's a matter of color ignores the fact that there's a material basis. And material, I mean, there's a reason, there's a tangible reason people are discriminated against. And in the United States, for African people, that reason was the drive for the increase in wealth. They needed agricultural workers because the Native Americans were still fighting for their land, and they were not going to be enslaved. So instead, they were slaughtered. Wars were waged, and they were pushed out of their lands into country that was foreign to them. Excuse me. And eventually, they had to have workers. Now, they could import workers from Europe, and they did, as indentured servants. And those people were eventually freed. But Africans, they justified bringing them over, maybe even in the beginning as indentured servants, but then condemning them to slavery and considering them property, and using race, so-called race, as a reason, saying Africans were inferior, and using color and other characteristics, culture, a different culture, not an inferior culture, but a different culture, using those as reasons to enslave folks. And then the land, and how rich can you get if you have to buy land? Well, that cuts into your profits. So you don't buy the land, you take the land. So you don't pay the workers from Africa, and you don't pay for the land from the indigenous people, the Native Americans. So no wonder America grew so strong, so fast, and became so rich, because the land was free, other than waging war, and the labor was free. So some myths about America. American wealth was accomplished by hard work and fair play. American society was a great melting pot of nations and races. The founders believed that all men are created equal. America was a true democracy and hated oppression. Africans were ignorant savages who did not have language, religion, culture, and wealth, and came to America with nothing. Native Americans were savages who brutally attacked colonists and scalped them because they were white. And black people were enslaved and discriminated because of the color of their skin. As I just said, American wealth was accomplished in part by hard work and fair play, but in great part by the expropriation of land from others, and the expropriation, the others being Native Americans, and the expropriation of labor from the Africans. You know, you take land and you take labor, and your costs are cut, and your profits increase. For American society, as far as American society being a great melting pot, you know, it's like, we have all nations and races. The original concept of the great melting pot was of European nations, of whites coming from Italy and Europe, Great Britain and Greece and Scandinavia, Norway, Russia, other places. But it was limited to those Europeans. It was not intended to include Africans, Native Americans, Asians, or anyone else. It was this melting pot that you often hear, America's a melting pot, was originally conceived to be for Europeans. The founders believed that all men are created equal. Well, you know, that's a lie. The founders, led by Thomas Jefferson, and we're going to get to him probably in the next class period, did not believe that all men are created equal. They believed that, and you'll read this in your assigned reading, all men, you could say all white men, but that's not even true, because they constructed a society that was based on race and class, social standing, and gender. And they say all men are created equal. Women did not have the vote. Women could not own property. Women were the property of their husbands. So another myth, America was a true democracy and hated oppression. Well, America could not be a true democracy. Number one, it's a representative democracy. Number two, it was severely restricted.